This week, Sean and I speak with John Thomas, Senior Policy Advisor at Pillsbury Law and former Capitol Hill Chief of Staff, who has spent over a decade inside the US defence and policy machine. He shares what founders need to know to break into the Department of Defence, navigate the Valley of Death, and structure US entities and IP, whilst building the relationships that truly move the needle in national security. Let's dive in. Welcome to the briefing room. Whether you're in defence, investing into the future, or simply curious about how great ideas become reality, this is your mission briefing. Let's get started. Yeah, John, I would love to hear a bit of your background and understand how you got to be here today and what is the role you're playing right now.
Sure. So right now I'm a senior policy advisor at the Pillsbury Law Firm. We're an international law firm that does everything from venture capital, mergers, acquisition, government contracts, ITAR, export-import, offices around the world. Before that, I was at another law firm for 5 years, but most importantly, I spent 12 years on Capitol Hill. I was the chief of staff for 2 members of Congress. I do a lot of work on international companies. So I represent several Israeli companies. I represent a few Australian companies. I represent a lot of startups here in the US. So I kind of live in 2 different ecosystems, which is large defense contractors and the very seed phase, pre-seed phase companies who are actually looking to innovate and get into DoD. And how do you cross that valley of death? And so I advise companies on everything.
So I'm really keen to understand what you see. So if we can start there in regards to, you've seen a lot of companies, you've worked with them coming over and work. Let's talk about working with the DoD, for example. We know that it takes a long time. People underestimate what's required. They underestimate maybe the time and resources required to allocate to do that level of expansion. What are some of the other things that most people don't consider or aren't aware of when they're starting out?
Most companies are unaware, as you stated, of how actually difficult it is to penetrate the Department of Defense. So we're talking about a consolidation of defense companies over the last 30 years where we had dozens down to basically 5 big primes.
Yep.
We're starting to see the rise of several others, but typically when you're coming over with a capability, one of the things that we always advise companies on, particularly coming from international organizations or international states, other countries, what we're looking for is something that doesn't exist in the U.S. inventory, a capability that you're not competing with somebody else on, but you're bringing something that's very niche and very innovative. And when you do that, what is the actual level of capability that you have? Are you a tier L0? Is this an idea? Do you have a product, a minimal viable product? Is there something, what's your actual plan for incorporation in the United States? Are you seeking capital in the United States? Where are you going to base that? Do you have any political connections? Have you talked to the department? Have you talked to the innovation labs? Have you talked to DARPA? Have you talked to, actually Naval X is no longer Naval X. That's something else. But have you talked to any innovation organizations? And so that's one of the things that I do is over the last year is really develop relationships with Austrade.
Yes.
With the trade teams here, because when I went to AUSA last year, it's my first year at Pillsbury, and because we have an international trade team and we have the corporate teams and we have the GovCon teams, we look holistically, and the ECVC teams in connection to capital allocators. I kind of look at where are you on this entire spectrum and what's the next step. So for example, on the back behind me, I just map out DoD acquisition on my wall. And when I'm having conversations with somebody, I kind of point at the wall and like, here's where you are, and here's where we need to go. And here's the things that you need to be thinking about. And a lot of that is small things like, okay, one, if you want to get access to an industry day and you actually want to hear what the Army is saying. So for example, next week, I'll be in Huntsville for the Army Counter UAS Industry Day or the Army UAS Industry Day, where they're going to map out how they're going to buy UAS systems and components for the next decade. So they're looking for low cost, they're looking for capabilities and doing one-on-one. If you have not signed up for that and you're not, a U.S. entity, so if you're coming from Australia, one of the first things you need to think about, yes, you can have those meetings, but you cannot actually have access to SIBRs, you can't have access to SATRs, you can't have access to contracts until you've actually established your U.S. corporation.
Has there been an example where somebody has without becoming a US entity, or is that always?
Well, it depends on who you're selling to. And
Mhm.
so DoD is very specific about that. So to have access to SAM.gov, you have to have a US entity.
Yep.
And all the DoD contracts, to have access to CBER, you have to be a US entity. So that may mean that you just have simply an LLC or a C Corp established. You've registered in Delaware, which we recommend for a variety of reasons. That you have that, and you have one or two people. That could be a BD person in the United States. This could be a marketing person in the United States. Could be your first CEO. That could be you. As long as the entity exists, you now have access to those opportunities. That also brings in a whole nother thing, which is transferring your IP to the United States. If you're coming from Australia, you have to think about, am I going to do greenfield? Do I want to buy a company? Am I trying to get a facilities clearance? Do I need if I want to do classified work, if I'm working in space, because a lot of space things, Space Force, a lot of space contracts require these certain classification levels that to get there, we're talking now about at least a 2-year, 18-month process to work through that facilities clearance process, and they become FOCI mitigated so that then you can have that in that clearance.
Talk to me about the resistance or the issues between the Australian entity, let's just say, and the US entity that you formed. What are some of the challenges there that you've seen people face with that process?
One of the challenges is control is kind of the main issue, because if you're a founder in Australia and you're setting up an entity in the United States, you're going to have a U.S. person for that facilities clearance. So you might
Correct.
have to have a U.S. person as a CEO.
Mm-hmm.
And then depending on the type of board that you need to create, you'll have outside board members who have no pre-existing relationship with the company. There's a little more details on that. And I also need to clarify that I do not practice law, so I'm not giving legal advice here.
Yeah. But
So what I've seen is the process is that it's an understanding that when you have access to the U.S. market, you're going to have access to DoD. Before we even get to that FCL part, we need to see if there's actually a market for your product. That's the first step. Two, if you have established that market, you have those meetings, you need to understand that there's interest, and you want to go through that FCL process. You can either do that before you set up your corporation or after you set up your corporation. So that's all part and parcel of that. The biggest issue I see is that issue of control, because once IP comes to the U.S., anything that's developed beyond that, if it's considered a defense article or if it's considered protected and classified, that cannot be shared back to the parent corporation.
yeah, okay.
And so it's what level, and also there's IP rights that the government takes in the U.S. when you sell to the U.S. government. They're also understanding there's 4 different types of IP licenses that the government can take, and it's very important that you actually have legal counsel on this particular piece of this, because that is where the equity is.
Yes.
That's where the value of the company is. And so once you get to that place, you don't want to give that away entirely. And so, but there are those issues of back and forth. It's like, we have to set up separate email systems. And the board, you have a member here at a board over there. So there's these little details that,
Quite big details, actually.
Yeah, these are very big details. Most aren't understanding when they're actually trying to access the U.S. market. So it's important. That's what we advise on all those steps.
And I know that it's like the shiny object, the shiny attraction to go to the States, work with the Department of Defense, have your product or innovation utilized, or even have some interest taken in it and start that entire process, raise some capital around that level of expansion, and start in the very early stages of perhaps, having a prototype, having some testing done, building those initial relationships. But further on from that, 2 years on, we're hitting these bigger challenges here. If I've come across to the States and there is an interest, like you mentioned, the innovation needs to be something that's not already there. It is different and new. It can't be competing with something else that maybe you already have. But often in the commercial reality, we often look, there might already be something like that, but we can do it faster, cheaper, more efficiently, or the team is stronger because they have a deeper knowledge or background or experience in some certain areas that might be advantageous. Is it still a bit of a non-compete area, or would you still look at it even if there is something in existence that's similar But like I mentioned, you're coming together, you're coming to the party with a few of those other things.
You are correct. That is another opportunity because, as you may have seen in the news, we've gone through an experience called Doge here in the US.
Yes.
And the idea that is still within the DoD is faster, better. If you can improve a process, like if you can actually create sort of a tool, even if it's an AI agent tool, something that actually takes a process that's in DoD and it makes that faster. The biggest thing is if you can make things cheaper right now in a larger quantity. And are you also going to bring manufacturing jobs to the United States? There are opportunities through other DPA and IBAS funding and other things that you can have access to if you're actually building out capacity in the United States for a product. So yes, if you are bringing something unique, but you're also bringing a capability that is much less expensive than the current system. But the biggest thing is to understand that if you're going to be competing against a prime, I don't recommend it. Because once you
share with me what it looks like to even attempt to compete with a prime. What are we up against?
So I think the goal is not actually to compete, but in the end, every U.S. company, particularly in the defense sector, is mission oriented. We're all seeking to provide the best systems and capabilities to the warfighter. A lot of times, if you get traction within a department, and there are primes who are around that, you actually might be more interested in actually being the sub to the prime. A lot of times when you're working in the cyber world or you're working in innovation space and you really get a capability that DoD wants, you might actually find it better to partner with a prime and come into that partnership with a capability that they can then scale for you. They already have the manufacturing capacity to do that. It's just a matter of that relationship and actually being willing to do that. Now, if you're coming in and you have there's an open space and there's a capability that there are primes there, but they're not offering what the government actually wants, that's an opportunity to come in and just be a competitor in that space. But recognize that's very difficult to do as a very small startup company. And so there are two different ways you can do this, depending on how much capital you have to do this. You could either set up your own company, or you could buy a company in the United States.
Yep. Then do many people, what is the percentage split of how people go about that? Is that a common way?
I think buying is a less common way unless you're a larger organization coming over, because that can get very expensive, but that also fast tracks the facilities clearance process. So you're not you've already got someone who has a security clearance, a company that already has a security clearance, and you're buying that. Then you need to go through CFIUS, which is another process here in the United States, Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. And so if you're acquiring a company, they will start looking at your history, the financial history. And another thing that people should consider is their cap tables when they're coming over. Because if you have any Chinese investment at all, you will need to exit that partner out as soon as you can.
Yep. I want to go back to what you mentioned before, and I think they're amazing initiatives and opportunities, is things like Industry Day, and those types of initiatives that do open up the pathway to maybe get involved. What else should be founders be looking for in regards to those types of opportunities to get involved in showcasing innovations, learning what's needed?
We had a great opportunity to spend a lot of time with the Australian delegation at Fed Supernova in Austin, Texas. And over LinkedIn, I met with several Australian companies and I introduced them to the innovation organizations, and we set those meetings up. And then we did a panel that Sean, actually, your colleague Sean, and Brianna Peake and Caitlin from the British Embassy were speaking about what AUKUS Pillar 2 is and how it works and what that is. And it was interesting to hear people in the audience who had actually never heard of AUKUS.
Yeah.
And they didn't know what it was. And what is actually Pillar 2? What does that mean? There's been a lot of focus on Pillar 1 and the submarines. I used to be the chief of staff for Virginia 2, which is Norfolk, Virginia Beach, Eastern Shore of Virginia, which means I had hunting and eagles in my district. There are low-cost conferences that you can go to and spend $100 to have access to the expo floor and go walk it. Go meet as many people as you can, find the reception spreadsheet that is circulating, get access to that. The Australia team, particularly the South Australia team and the Western Australia team, are the ones that are very active. I partner with them. They're sponsors at Station D.C, which I'm a founding member here in D.C, which is where the capital allocators, the founders, and the startup companies all get together, talk policy, talk processes, and just help each other out. And so we're going to have another event here on September 25th where I believe Brianna Peak, who's the Western Australia Trade Commissioner out of Austin, is going to be speaking. And I'm going to be working with both those teams to set up an AUKUS event later in October that highlights Australian companies coming to the U.S. So the actual schedule, that's the other thing that's up there on the wall of all the defense conferences.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that. In a lot of the people that I get to speak to in this format in particular, it is very heavily weighted towards attending the events, walking the conference floors, making the time, like you said, buy the ticket, buy the flight even to get to the place where the event is happening.
It is. It's seeing. So let's say, for example, that you have an EW widget, something that provides a capability to. I have a company in mind, so I'm just going to speak generally.
Yes.
Finding out who are the program managers in the services, because one of the most important things to understand for the U.S. Department of Defense is the money is not in the innovation organizations, it's in the services. And so who your actual target audience is are the PEOs and the PMs for the programs where they buy your product. Those are the people who attend the large defense conferences. So like AUSA, AFA, Sierra Space, or Sierra Cyber, Soft Week down in Tampa. They're kind of at the major events. And what we do is for our clients, that we schedule out the entire who's there, and then we ask for meetings and we set up those meetings. But the purpose is not necessarily to have the meeting there. It's to have the meeting in their office after the meeting, after the conference. You send out a bunch of requests. Yes, you may meet them at the conference, but they're meeting with a lot of people and a brain, they can't keep it all in because they talked to 30 companies today. And you got to stick out somehow. And the way you stick out is consistent engagement over time, which means once you've identified that program office, you attend any event online or in person that they offer, and you just are a consistent presence as much as you can be. They are doing a lot of, and we talked about industry days. Industry days are things that people miss because they're noticed on SAM.gov and sometimes on LinkedIn. So like the Army's doing a better job of posting things on LinkedIn. The Coast Guard posts things on LinkedIn for their UAS industry day. So there are other social media places where they're trying to get the word out because they're getting the same people.
Yeah.
And so they want to see who else is in this ecosystem that we don't know about, that we may be missing out on. Because there's an exciting opportunity for my part, I want to bolster the relationship in AUKUS. And so I want to make sure that there are Australian companies coming to the U.S. and U.S. companies going to Australia. And the greater integration that we have over time leads to a much stronger partnership. And so if we can get more, and I know that the defense team at the Australian MC is doing a wonderful job of getting they had the best booths, by the way, at every conference. It's always the biggest. And that's partially why I made that part of my effort. This is a huge opportunity and we don't want to miss that. So they do a great job at connecting. They also do one of the things, and I would actually recommend that if you are considering it, if you're a startup and if you're a founder in Australia and you're thinking of coming to the United States and looking at the market for a particular industry, get on one of those trade delegations coming to the U.S. They do it in small groups. Each state also does their own. Yes. Each Australian state also does their own.
Yep.
So if you can get on one of those delegations and come, you're not only just going to the conference, you're actually having meetings with DoD before the conference. And so you get an idea of the players in the room. And then you may not be talking to the program manager, you may be talking to an undersecretary, you may be talking to someone. We have this saying that is important for founders to understand, which is generals make general decisions and majors make major decisions.
I like it. I'm going to write that down. I'm going to write it down on my wall behind me. So
it's wonderful to meet with the top leadership.
you've highlighted very clearly what the market access looks like and what the steps founders need to take, the challenges that are involved, the time that it takes. Well, let's talk about in terms of emerging tech or things that you're seeing now and things that you're not seeing that you would love to see. So let's talk about the gaps. First of all, let's share, what are you seeing a lot of?
Yeah.
And where do you think there is a gap that people might like to look towards?
We kind of touched on this earlier, which is simple things that just need to be updated.
Yeah, right.
There's a lot of focus that I see, a lot of pitches on agentic AI systems. And they're great for speeding up processes. They're selling to, they're selling to DIU, they're selling to companies who are doing that. There is a shift toward that. The biggest markets are going to be in the autonomy world. And I don't know if I can say it on here, but I'm very good friends with Green Room Robotics, and I work with their team. I've just been a fan of them for a while now. So there's this autonomy piece to it that could be applied through a whole bunch of different things. So you have companies that are applying that to land vehicles, companies applying that to UAS, companies applying that to other things. Space is probably the most untapped sector that is going to grow the most over the next few years. So the big thing that's in the United States, which is the Golden Dome. So that's the reconciliation bill added $25 billion to this project. Most of that is for ground-based interceptors and other interceptors. But they have two different areas where I think there's an opportunity. One is the space layer. So all the small satellites, the capabilities that you need to add into space that don't exist right now. And there's fewer companies that do that today.
Yep.
I met with about 8 Australian space companies about a couple months ago. And we just think there's opportunities for all of them. It's just a matter of getting in. And the space sector itself, commercial space sector, is growing significantly.
Yes.
And I know it's a goal of Australia to get a Falcon 9 or another launch from South Australia. So that's a whole separate issue.
So why do you think space is still untapped? It's just a timing thing. It is the newer area of defense for more people from a broader background to get involved in. Do you think it's just a matter of time, or do we need to see more stories shared on what's possible?
Yeah, what it comes down to is hard tech.
Hard tech.
Hard tech is what the opportunity is. What's the difficult thing to do? That's where there's going to be opportunities that, particularly that is present in space, to where it's very hard to do anything in space because it's a completely different environment.
Yes.
Quantum capabilities is another big thing, which I know that's also a big capability that Australia is very good at. The reason I say space is I want to say untapped. I don't want to overrepresent the kind of capabilities that are out there, or underrepresent the capabilities that are out there. I just see that as there's been significant increase with Space Force as a growing agency within DoD, and it's going to continue to grow. And its most important aspect of that is actually international cooperation.
Yes.
Capabilities. And so there's an opportunity to either be in the US or be in Australia and tap into that Space Force market for the joint capabilities that are moving forward. We represent an Australian company that does cloud work, secret cloud work.
Yep.
And that to me is the backbone potential of AUKUS, which is actually being able to share no foreign secret information and on products and capabilities and plans between the two countries.
Yeah.
And so layers on top of, if you think of like the stack, when we talk about full stack capabilities, sort of identifying, and I can't tell you right off the top of my head what stack level that is at, but I do know that the Army in Golden Dome at their Golden Dome UAS Industry Day, hey Sean, did say they are looking for new capabilities in space to help, ISR capabilities, but other sensing capabilities that don't exist, that we don't have the capacity of right now, because we're trying to do something. We learned a very valuable lesson from what happened in Israel when Iran was sending the 500 something missiles into Israel, which is, if we were to experience the same thing, we don't have the same defensive capability to meet that same thing. So that's really what's behind this push to get more and more missile defense into the United States. So hypersonics is the other one. So I think you guys just announced your investment in Tiberius, so congratulations on that.
Yes, we did. Yeah.
So those lower cost hypersonics, lower cost kinetic interceptors, lower cost missiles is what the Army is looking for under Golden Dome. And so if you can get into those air and missile defense down in Huntsville, Alabama, and talk to them about your capability, I think it'd be a really good idea to get down there now and talk about your capability.
John, thank you so much for your time. And hopefully you've had the opportunity to talk about your extensive relationships with entities in Australia. So,
yeah, I can talk a little bit more about that. So I basically started last year to connect with every single Australian organization that I could.
Yeah.
So same thing that, I do as almost business development. It's almost like being a founder to where I'm trying to create this network and I need to create it as fast as I can and build those relationships out. So I work with all of the Austrade offices, so the different states. I work with Paul Burfield at the embassy, Matt Cantangelo, others who work in this space who are bringing the Australian companies over. We're connecting with law firms who are in Australia that we can share sort of the export-import relationship to where if we can help each other. If we have U.S. companies going to Australia, we will connect them with them. Cameron Watts, who's with West East Hemisphere, he's a lobbyist that actually he's an Australian lobbyist, so he's the opposite of me. But we met at RSA, so working cybersecurity issues and cyber companies, et cetera. And so it's the same process. It's like build out relationships. If you want to be influential in an industry, meet as many people as you can, be at the events that are going. And I think it's very beneficial for Pillsbury that we are literally co-located with the Australian Embassy, which is right around the corner.
Yes.
So I actually got my photo with the Ambassador Rudd, so I was very excited about that. And they had the Billington Cybersecurity Conference going on right now here. We know that Australia is hosting the ICA coming up in Sydney, so that's the world's largest space conference.
Yes.
So congratulations on that. The other thing I've been doing is meeting as many defense tech VCs as I can.
Mm-hmm.
And ever since then, Sean and I have, it's been a pleasure to see him at various events, to go to the Tabard Inn here in DC and share a meal and talk through all things DIU, innovation. And the real interesting thing is that I also share the view that capital allocators are going to be the future of defense. Because we are seeing one of the things that was a big complaint on Capitol Hill for years is we also get a lot of companies coming in for us to spend appropriations on R&D, right? So we want the government to cover our research and development because one, we don't want to put that funds ourselves into R&D. And so if we can use the government to do that for capability, we'll do that. However, we've seen this shift. And if you look at Anduril, if you look at others, really, they started in the Silicon Valley, and now we have other Silicon Valleys like Austin, Texas, where your Army Futures Command is co-located with DIU, with AFWorks, with Army Applications Lab. And they also have a fund in Capital Factory that is providing defense tech, Defense 101 classes. They're teaching, how does acquisition work? Mm-hmm. And so there are several other funds, and Beaton Zone is one of those funds that's doing this as well. That are focused on defense and doing this. And one of the most important things that when I ask a capital allocator, I ask what sector are you looking to find companies in? Okay, and the second question is, do you have experience in that sector? Because I don't want to, for my part, I don't want to send a company to a fund that has no value. It's a two-way street. They don't have a value to add to them or experience or mentorship that they can say, we have experience working in this agency or with this program or with these funding lines, these contract vehicles that you're trying to seek. And so if you can match up with fund that actually has that experience, that's a no-brainer for me.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. And I'm sure Sean's probably nodding away as well. And I think as we go on and there is more stories being shared of companies being successful in this space or having a large amount of impact, there will definitely be more funds that tend to get involved in defence, whereas maybe they may have had a stance previously that they weren't going to do anything in this space.
Right.
But we, for example, as you mentioned, it's never just the capital. It is, for us, we actually spend more time working on those relationships, everything that we've spoken about today. It's the reason why we have people like Sean based in the States on the ground with those deep connections and the experience, because there's no way we can assist and work with portfolio companies if we can't back it up with that level of assistance and guidance or connections and knowledge. So I'm really glad that you highlighted it from the other perspective and seeing the difference in those kinds of funds. And as Steve always mentions, he likes touching things that other people won't touch. And defence seems to be one of them at the moment. I'm not sure if it's going to always stay that way, but it's definitely heavily weighted towards the support and the networks and the connections and the pathways in terms of what we offer. And we're really, really proud to be able to back that.
Right. And one of the interesting things actually about the defense capital allocators in the DC area and in Austin is they all know each other. It's its own ecosystem. And I think that if you're going to come to the US as a defense company from Australia, I would want to live in that ecosystem where they all know each other and they are more than happy to connect you with their friend who's at another fund that will help you out. And a lot of these people put out information all the time on LinkedIn or
They do.
A16Z does a very good job of this. And so there's these opportunities to be in that ecosystem. And so having that connection, I think, and having that capital allocator that actually understands your market is a huge value add for you as a company. And then also if they have those relationships, which I hope to develop with law firms, that also can provide and understand the defense ecosystem and the defense acquisition process and can cover you on your company formation and things and understand and work with your investors, because it's not enough that we are doing something separate. Is that we are working all together to help this company succeed and help them win.
That's right. Yeah. It's such a.
I was just going to amplify some of the points that both you and John
Were you
just
going to say something,
articulated.
Sean?
I mean, I take the Austin ecosystem. So I'm at the conference here in Colorado Springs at the Air Force Academy, and there are a number of the Austin dual-use VCs that are here, right? And they came here for deal flow. They're actually doing deals in the sidelines and in the hallways, and being able to get one of them on your side, if you're an Australian company, gets you access to a whole host of other ones, right? And not only do they have the relationships that can provide the capital, but they also know the local lawmakers. They know the economic development teams. They know folks like John, who actually not only represents them as counsel, but also as leading incubators like Station D.C. and other things that are truly value additive to get these companies over that valley of death. And so I can't emphasize it enough. Being a part of a very strong dual-use ecosystem goes a long way. And I'm hoping that the Front Range of Colorado eventually starts to rival Austin as time goes on. So,
yeah, I actually think it's in the interest of the United States to actually have multiple ecosystems like Austin. We're trying to create that in DC right now. It does exist. It's existed in the past, but now it's sort of being organized in a very formal way. And I'm a founding member of Station D.C. I work with the executive director. I become a mentor there. So I'll give free advice to companies, walk them through things, and just ask me a question. And I'm happy to answer it. We have a couple others. So I'll throw a shout out to my friends in St. Louis who are co-located. They have not an incubator, but sort of a startup hangout area called T-Rex. T-Rex they're co-located with Moonshot Labs, which is the National Geospace Intelligence Agency innovation arm. And so they are looking to network. So I've connected them with Capital Factory to learn from Capital Factory. If we can create the same thing, Sean, in Colorado, I'm more than happy to help with that. And there are these hubs of innovation. I just spent the last day and a half with city CIOs and CTOs of major cities in the US. I hosted a conference here. So my brain's been on city work. But they're also facing, it's almost like the same thing. Like they are dealing with innovation and trying to figure out how to organize that. But we need to think of innovation in a different way, which is what it really comes down to is sort of how DoD does it. What is the capability that we don't have that we need to have? And who can provide it? And that's the same pattern across local governments, the same patterns against governments. How do we connect the innovators and the entrepreneurs and the founders to the actual ecosystem that we can actually bring those capabilities up and provide them to the people that we need to provide them to?
Yeah, you know what, John, with the government, we've been through a similar pathway previously, just with the general tech startup ecosystem back 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago. And the government was slow to adopt ways to support either, whether it's hubs, like you mentioned, various programs, initiatives, or creating the infrastructure so that the individual organisations or private organisations to get involved, and even so far as to creating the right environment for more VCs attracting venture capital in, so we can actually invest in the early stage technology companies. Something like defence is still so far away from where it needs to be in terms of the innovation side, unless, of course, if we had someone like John Thomas come to the Queensland government or any other government and give a talk and say what we needed to do, everyone would be nodding and taking notes, because it is so much more heavily weighted from an international, especially somebody like yourself with experience in an ecosystem that's doing it. So these types of conversations are valuable. If you were to come here and speak to various organizations, they're really impactful types of activities to share what you know, to be able to highlight where the gaps are. I would encourage you. I know you already do it a lot more, but if you're interested in doing more of it, we'd be happy to support you coming here and make those introductions and create the events around it, because what our Australian government does like is examples of proof of concept, things that work, where it's working before, what we need to do. And we tend to value the opinion of externals more highly than the people who are already here. So I love everything that you've shared, and I think it's super valuable.
I made the joke this morning that sometimes I have to have someone else tell my son the same thing I was trying to tell him.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. So if we have an American come over and tell us what we should be doing in the Australian government, it would be implemented, in the next 12 to 18 months. I can guarantee it.
Yeah. And I also want to say there are other incubators that exist within companies here in the United States. So for example, one of our clients, IAI, hosts an incubator for 4 or 5 companies every year. And so there are other opportunities to be in that accelerator programs that are in the larger companies. So I want to make sure I mention that, because that's another opportunity that, if you have, and I have relations particularly with our clients that do these, and those exist also with also other members of Station D.C. So Treble One is a group of former Air Force colonels, guys who start and they work on cyber projects, and they work on bringing them up to the Air Force acquisition. Sean, I definitely need to introduce you. And what they do is they actually run an accelerator program, incubator program out of in Huntsville, Alabama, and they introduce them to the economic development. They introduce them to the local guys there at the Redstone Arsenal. They introduce them to space and missile defense. And so they run these accelerators. And so Chris Wimmer, who's the BD guy here in DC, he and I have become really good friends, I just want to know what everyone is doing so that when an Australian company comes to me, I can point them to any number of options that can get them to that next step.
Yeah, super impactful, very strategic. I think there's
I'd love to come to Australia.
Station DC. I think there's room for a version of Station DC here.
It'd be wonderful if there was
in
one.
Australia for sure. And
I'm happy to work on that effort. I think that'd be amazing. I think they would actually be very interested.
Yeah, I think, like you mentioned, the closer we can bring those connections, we're doing it. Everyone needs to travel a lot anyway. And we know that you can engineer a lot of those conversations, you can plan for them. However, it's those serendipitous ones that happen just by co-location of things happening at the same time, people being in the right place, and having a central location where people can come is very powerful. I've seen it work before. You know the evidence of it, you live it, and you're sharing stories of it.
Yeah, just the only thing I would just add on the Station D.C. transporting itself over the Pacific to Australia. My question for the both of you, does it sit in Sydney? Does it sit in Canberra? Where does it sit? Where would be the greatest nexus, right? So there's a reason why it's Station D.C., because I think in this dual-use ecosystem, it's not just the technologies, it's actually dealing with the regulatory burden, and then also, too, being very close to the customer. So that's a question that's open, for conversation. It's like, where's the greatest concentration in the Commonwealth of Australia that would justify that station? You choose the city.
Look, I will always be advocating for the eastern seaboard. There's lots of arguments for probably Canberra. Adelaide always wants to fight for the position of leading in defence, and then you've got WA, which is it's almost like a whole other country on its other side, which is connected by land. So there are so many reasons, and people could put forward arguments on where this thing needs to be. As long as we're all aligned with the outcome, I think we can make it work in whatever location.
Yeah, and right now, both South Australia and Western Australia are founding sponsors of Station D.C.
There you go. Yeah.
So,
it highlights the level of commitment already, right?
Right. And Station D.C. may not be the exact model.
Something similar.
Something that, what works so well in Capital Factory is actually it's a fund that's associated with the workspace and the education. And so if you can create any number of those. So Station D.C. is actually an offshoot of Capital Factory, because they also have Station Texas. And I think in the long term, they're going to be looking at setting up other stations, heads up, in other cities.
That's why I mentioned it. I can see where this is going here. We don't need to go and reinvent the wheel. Let's just plug in different areas, different locations of the ecosystem to have the same outcome. We're all working for the same outcome. We're on the same mission.
Yeah.
By aligning all the parties involved in that into achieving the same outcome.
One of the things that I also recommend is if you're coming to the U.S. and you set up your corporation and you set up your headquarters in a state, I think one of the first things you want to do is introduce yourself to your members of Congress, introduce yourself to the leaders, and just let them know that, hey, I set up here in your state. I'm looking to grow my company, and they have some political coverage, and that's actually very easy to do for things that you may need help on. So they can sign letters, they can make phone calls on your behalf, they can open doors on your behalf. I used to do this all the time when I worked on the Hill. Companies coming here, they don't have a contact. I can send an email over to Office of Legislative Affairs asking who the contact is, and I can connect the two together. So it happens all the time. Companies who take advantage of this early on tend to do better. So Palantir did this a lot early on. So they put a lot of their efforts when they were growing into lobbying work. I know it doesn't sound wonderful, but it is necessary sometimes because the larger companies are doing this all the time. And if you're going to compete, you have to compete in the same spaces that they compete. So that doesn't need to be a big thing. It just means that you need to hire the right kind of folks to have those relationships. Same thing when you're setting up. You want to hire this. You want to be funded by the capital allocator that has those relationships. So really what it comes down to is build that network.
Excellent sage advice.
Early as you can.
I think you were commenting
the
first person that Andrew hired outside of the founders was a lobbyist, in essence, Chris Burrows, right? And so they know how to play the long game. And a lot of companies get tripped up if they don't necessarily know how to deal with those political headwinds, right? So excellent and sage advice.
And definitely the common theme for this entire conversation is building those connections, understanding how it works in the States. It is so different. I can't tell you how, well, you would know. You would both know how different it is here. We can go from state to state. Nothing changes in terms of the tax system. So it doesn't really, it's no advantage other than where you'd like to live. Where the America is completely different. And understanding that deeply, not just having a high level understanding, but really connecting in and understanding deeply what those networks look like and how you need to play the game. I think the key takeaway here, it is a game, and how you need to play it needs to be quite strategic and act with intent and plan to play the long game as long as you stay on mission.
Exactly.
Excellent. Well, I will leave you both here to go and have the rest of the evening to yourselves. Me, the day is just starting in sunny Gold Coast, so I will look forward to chatting to you soon, and hopefully, John, we can get you down here, down under, and have a chat with some of our governments and get some changes made. I can't wait.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Sure.
Have a good rest of the day.
Excellent. Thanks, Sean. Thanks, John. Thanks for joining us in the briefing room. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with the people shaping our national security and future capability. If you liked what you heard, please follow the show, share it with a friend, and join us next time for more stories and insights from the front lines of innovation. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and keep building the future.